frogs. They tend to, it tends to get very hot, and frogs will actually crawl out and get stuck on the lining and will fry. So try not to leave your pond liner exposed. And that stable water level will make sure things that are like, if you've got things like frog spawn in the shallow areas, it won't dry out. It's also really important to think about the level of oxygen in your pond. So having different oxygenating plants in there, you can have things like hornwort or things like curled pondweed. Again, I'll share a resource with you at the end, if that's okay, through Rebecca, that will give you a list of different plants that you can use. Think about things that will be at different levels. We say about 70% covering the pond, about 30% underneath. So things like water lilies as well are really good to provide some shade and help stabilize that water level. And the other thing as well is a vegetated margin. So you can see in this pond with the big green tick, that's got a fantastically vegetated margin. It's got different plants at different levels. There's some water forget-me-not there. You've got some long grasses and things like frogs and toads. They don't spend all of their time in the water. What they'll do is they'll go into that vegetated margin, especially if you get things like froglets and toadlets. I don't know if you've ever had frogs or toads in your garden. You know, you walk through some long grass or your lawn and they're all in the lawn. So that vegetated margin will make sure that they've got that that shade that they want. So there's some tips. Again, I'll share that resource with you at the end. The other thing to think about, not just for amphibians, but different wildlife, thinking about the different plants that we can have in our garden. So we can have wild patches, we can have things in pots and planters, we can have different food plants. And what I'd like to encourage you to do is think about native pollinators. So things like self-seeding annual plants. Here's some great examples of just some blue plants that you can get. So cornflowers, borage, different geraniums, cornflowers and scabious are really good for bees. Borage is great. There's all sorts of plants that you can get in wildflower seed mixes, or you can get these, you know, as individual packets. You can also think about perennials as well. These will return every year. So things like foxgloves, also things like verbena. These are a non-native species. Verbena bonariensis, these lovely tall purple flowers. And we're thinking about a variety of heights. So you'll get things like hoverflies feeding on tall plants, and you'll get bees coming in. I'd also like you to think about non-native plants as well. We say native plants because these have evolved alongside our pollinators, things like different bees, but these tend to be growing sort of in the spring and into the summer, and things like non-native plants that come from North America, for example, will grow later in the season. So by having native and non-native mixes, studies have shown, in fact the Sheffield Bugs Project has shown that having a variety of different plants and the quantity of flowers is more important to getting a large quantity and biodiverse range of pollinators. So try and think about extending the growing season. If you grow vegetables, you can think about things like pest confusers. So mint will draw pests away from your tomatoes and your carrots. Garlic chives as well are really good to draw things away from carrots. And different fruits and seeds as well. So if you have a hedge, think about things like blackthorn or brambles, you know, different blackberries, and they will help feed things like the birds into the autumn. Also things like wild strawberries will feed things that may forage on the ground. Things like sunflowers you can turn into little mini bird feeders as they you know, develop their seeds into the autumn. You can also think about introducing those long plants and, you know, those long grasses into your border. So by having a bit of a messy border. When I say a messy border, I mean just, you know, try not to do too much weeding, maybe in a certain area. And you'll be surprised about what comes up, and also things can look very pretty as well. I have a lot of wildflowers in my border, so I just sprinkle some cornflower seeds, and these will come up and add a lot of colour and add a lot of variety of heights as well. You can also do some no-mow areas. So if you do have a lawn, you can have a little spot that you don't mow, that you allow the grass to grow. And again, you'll be really surprised about what will grow up there. You'll get some dandelions, which I know, you know, can be a bit of a nuisance, but they're actually fantastic for pollinators. early on, because they flower very early in the spring. But you'll get things like different grasses coming up. You'll maybe get some vetches, you'll maybe get some clovers, and all of these are really good for bees. Some tips here. Long grasses are great, those wildflowers, and you can have these as a cut flower patch as well. So things like cosmos will look really nice, and you can bring these into the house. Have a variety of heights again, and if you do need to trim or mow, particularly if you've got a pond, just maybe have a little feel around for what's potentially already in there to try and disturb it and get it away before you cut that grass. So I was at my parents' house earlier this year, and they had a hedgehog nesting in a patch of long grass, which was adorable. And it just, goes to show you what will live in just, a bog standard bit of grass. And hedgehogs and toads and frogs really suffer from strimmer injuries. And again, try and have that around your pond border if you do have a pond. The other thing to think about, if you do grow vegetables or you grow plants that you like have cut flowers from and you want to keep pest free, is thinking about natural pest control. I know we all have the nemesis of slugs and snails. I don't know who else lives in a terrace garden in Sheffield, but my terrace garden is absolutely full of slugs that come from my neighbours and things, and I have to do slug hunt quite often. That's one of the best ways of removing slugs and snails. I know we can't all do this though, so you can attract them to different areas of your garden where you can then remove them at your leisure, or you can allow them to live in that area. So I put some boards down, a wet plant saucer, and as it gets warm, when the sun comes up, they'll go under those boards and under those saucers, and then you can remove them from those areas. Bramble is a really good natural barrier. You can see a snail here having a hard time of some brambles. You can also think about sacrificial plants and food. I know it sounds a little bit counterintuitive to feed them, but if you put down things like cucumber, they're more likely to eat that than your beans. So that's a good way of attracting them away from your vegetable plants. I'm not going to encourage you to use beer traps, because although it might look like you're doing a good job when you've got like 10 slugs in your beer trap, what you're actually doing is attracting slugs and snails from around 200 meters squared from your garden, and they're all coming into your garden. You're only probably catching about 10% of them. And all of this is so we don't use things like slug pellets that can be harmful for wildlife, especially methylaldehyde. I can't even say that, sorry. Is really bad for things like hedgehogs and toads, because they will eat these slugs that have ingested these. So if you do have to use slug pellets, I'm going to recommend that you use ferrous phosphate. Again, obviously, try not to use the slug pellets, but this has been shown to be not so detrimental to wildlife. This will be certified by the RHS or the RSPB, or labelled as organic. So that's the thing to go for. But also by attracting natural predators to your garden, things like different amphibians and birds, they will help you take control of your pests. So toads are really good for feeding on small slugs. It's a bit of a myth that hedgehogs feed on lots of slugs and snails. It only forms about 10% of their diet. So by focusing on amphibians, that's a great way to introduce those natural pest controllers. Or you can think about things like nematodes. You can buy these as like little packets. They're sort of parasites of slugs and snails, and you can sprinkle them in your garden and water them, and it sort of like activate them, and they'll help take control of your slugs. The other thing to think about are companion plants. So I grow nasturtiums in my garden, because in my garden I have plants for pollinators and things like that for wildlife, but I also grow vegetables. And the nasturtiums have been absolutely covered in aphids, which at first I found very alarming, but there is nothing on any of my my plants. My beans are completely pest free, my sunflowers are pest free, because they're all on these nasturtiums. So that's something to really think about. And these can just grow in between your plants. You don't have to give any growing space away. They'll spread and they'll produce loads and loads of flowers and really draw those pests away. The other thing to think about if you do have hedgerows is to think about, and different trees, think about when we're going to prune these. So we want to try and avoid bird nesting season, and that is basically most of the spring and the summer. If you do have to do some pruning, please have a check for things like nests. It's actually illegal to disturb nesting birds. So if you do see something nesting, and you do need to check up to the day before, because things can, move in quite quickly, just leave that area alone. Don't try and move it. Don't try and disturb it. Just wait until they've fledged, and then you should be safe to work on those bushes. But just be really careful and try and do any work sort of in the autumn and winter. As we go into autumn and winter, we can think about providing houses and different refugia for the different insects and the different amphibians and the mammals that we've attracted to our garden. So a book hotel is a great thing to do. Again, I'll provide some resources on how to build one of those. A hedgehog house is something you can build or you can buy and put in your garden. But specifically for reptiles and amphibians, we're thinking about things like a log pile or a hibernaculum. And hibernacular, these things, it's a complicated word, but essentially it is a pile of logs or rubble that you put in your garden that will provide that home for amphibians that need to stay cool and damp, or reptiles that need somewhere to shelter from the hot sun, for example. So hibernacular, they're basically areas where you've dug down into the soil, or you've piled on top of the soil a range of different things like hardwoods or rubble. You can do this in if you've got well-draining soil in a shaded area, dig down about 60 centimeters. Make sure when you pile these things in there that you're leaving lots of gaps, because this is where your different critters are going to go and hide. Once you've built that up, either to the ground level or a bit higher if you want, you can cover that with soil and or turf. You can even plant things like wildflowers on top, but make sure you leave some access holes. You can either, do this by eye, or you can put things like drain pipes in, and that will leave those holes, and that will make sure that they can access that sheltered area that you've produced. A log pile will do equally as well, and that will provide that that refugia, but also provide a place for things like detritivores to live, which will help provide a base for a biodiverse garden. Again, put this in a shady area and make sure it's undisturbed. For a book hotel, I mean, you don't have to do anything as extravagant as this pallet-based one that you can see at the bottom here, but you're looking at things like basically a range of different hidey holes of different diameters. So things like bamboo, things like hollow grass stems. You can drill holes into logs. You can put things like plant pots in there, and you'll get things like leafcutter bees hopefully moving in, and again a range of things like wood lice and different different spiders and things living in there. Other refugia that we can think about, upturned plant pots are really good as toad homes. It's a great thing to do with kids. If you want to paint a plant pot and put it in your garden, you can break it in half if you like, or you can prop it up with a rock. Try and put that in an area where there's some vegetation. Metal sheeting is actually really good for things like lizards. They will go and warm up on the metal sheeting and then go underneath when they get a bit too warm. Or a pile of undisturbed bricks will be great for things like newts. Again, you're providing those nooks and crannies for these things to go and shelter in there. Something else to think about is a compost heap. So a compost heap provides a range of resources for toads in terms of food, but also shelter. So it's a nice sort of damp area that they'll go and hide in and live in there. Your humble pallet, again, is a great way of building a very quick compost heap. You want things with exposed sides so things can crawl in, but also, you need to hold that material up. Try and avoid things like sealed plastic bins. They're really not good for wildlife. Wildlife can't get in, wildlife can't get out. You can even just think about things like piles of leaves and grass. So if you've mown your lawn, instead of chucking that in your green bin, maybe you've got an area of your garden that's quite damp. You can go and pile that grass there, and you may even get things like grass snakes moving in, or slow worms. You can cover these areas with things like old carpet or a tarpaulin, or again metal sheeting, and that will help to keep the moisture in, and that will help with the decomposition process as well. We can also think about providing homes for things like bats and birds. Bat boxes are things that you can buy or you can make. Bird boxes, you can again make or buy these, but I'd like to encourage you to try and check these every year in the autumn and winter, because you can get things like failed broods, or you can get things like wasps moving in, and that can mean that in the spring they're not going to be used by birds because they're not suitable. They've got, you know, a load of rubbish in there. So take them down, give them a bit of a clean, you know, and put them back up, and then, you know, they'll be suitable for anything to move in. You don't have to provide bedding, you know, they'll do that themselves. When we go into autumn and winter, we may also be thinking about how we want to deal with our hard standing, making some repairs to our garden. So just be careful about what may be living there. So things like shed bases or paving slabs, things like newts really love living in there. So as you lift these things up, just do it really carefully. Try not to squish anything that's living there. All of these things, they don't hibernate. They just go into sort of a state of semi-dormancy. They'll still move around. So if you do disturb something, you're not killing it by bringing it out of hibernation. So you can either put it back where you found it, if you're not permanently removing that structure, or you can try and find somewhere similar to put these creatures, or at least somewhere that's a bit cool and damp. You know, don't leave amphibians out in the sun. That's the key thing to think about. We also need to think about how things get in and out of our garden. So fence gaps are really important, particularly if you live in a new build. There's a real tendency for developers to put these really harsh borders around fences. And, you know, wildlife, it's got no chance. And gardens are really important for connecting habitats, and things like hedgehogs really need to be able to move between gardens. They can move several kilometers in one night. So there's a great website called Hedgehog Streets, or the Wildlife Trust does have a section on hedgehogs and some advice on hedgehog holes. It needs to be about 15 centimeters squared for hedgehog. They do follow linear features, so they will walk along your hedge and pass through when they find that hole. A toad obviously only needs something around 5 centimeters squared, but try and put several of these in. So, you know, having that penetrable border is really important for wildlife to be able to access your garden. But also toads, they're migratory. They will go from an ancestral pond that may not be anywhere near your garden, but then travel to your garden for things like resources, you know, especially if you've made your garden wildlife friendly and there's a lot of food there. So they need to be able to travel between these different habitats. Oops. Oh, I don't know why it's not moving. Sorry. There we are. Okay. When we feed the birds, this is something that a lot of us do. We can also think about the types of food that we use. So we recommend that you buy bird-specific food, something like from the RSPB or from the Wildlife Trust, that that we would have thought about carefully, providing the right nutrition to different species. But you can make your own bird food, and you can provide things like scraps, things like peanuts. Providing a range of different foods is really important. So you'll get things like finches that will feed on seeds, and then you get things like thrushes that will feed on, for example, windfall apples. So if you've got an apple tree, you can pile some of those apples that are no good for cooking or eating around your bird table, and they'll come and feed on there. And you'll also attract things like badgers as well. And if you do get badgers, people do really worry that badgers will dig up your garden, but what they're doing is they're looking for food. So if you actually feed them, and you feed things like foxes, what they'll do is they'll know that food source is there, and they'll come to it, they'll feed, they'll have no need to dig up your garden to try and find food resources, and they'll go on their way. So it's a great thing to do as well for kids, feeding the birds and all sorts of wildlife. You can put up nature cameras. I really encourage you to do this. It's a fantastic thing that you can do alongside things like citizen science. So you can have a wildlife camera trap in your garden, or you can take part in things like the Great Garden Bird Watch or the Big Butterfly Count, and help researchers and people like the Wildlife Trust understand the different species that we're getting within our gardens. And that helps us to provide the right source of resource and the right sort of guidance to support the sort of species that we're finding. I'm a really big advocate for citizen science, and the Nature Counts project that I ran for the Wildlife Trust was focused on attracting different species and understanding them through citizen science to produce a state of nature report for Sheffield. But Froglife specifically do have their own citizen science tool and citizen science project. We use information that is submitted to us on different reptiles and amphibians to understand things like how they move in response to climate change, different population sizes and fluctuations, and also things like the spread of diseases. And we do this through an app called Dragon Finder, and you can download Dragon Finder on the Apple store or on your Android store. It's free, and it provides a different range of benefits, different resources for you to be able to identify the different species that you're seeing. For example, we have here a toad and a frog, not staged at all, this photo. It'll help you go through a range of different features to identify the differences between these species, the color of the skin, the texture of the skin, the location of the eye and the shape and the size, for example, to help you arrive at the species that you are looking at. You can then record your sighting, and you can do this for your own benefit. So you can look at how maybe the changes that you're making to your garden is attracting different species, and then you can report these to Froglife, and then we can use this information to help in our conservation efforts. You can also donate to us, or you can learn about the different activities that we're doing, and also through our website as well. And so really recommend that you download that and use it to learn yourself about the different amphibians that you and reptiles that you will get in your garden. So we've got an opportunity to ask some questions, but I'm just going to go through some key ones that I get asked. So a lot of people will think that wildlife may damage your plants or may damage your garden, but the things that I focused on here are actually about attracting the right sort of animals to your garden that will benefit you in many different ways. So for example, pollinating your plants. So if you do grow flowers for cut flowers, or if you grow vegetables, things like peas, they need pollinating. So by attracting loads of different flying insects, you will get a much greater yield. And then also you'll be attracting the species that will help you take control of your pests. A lot of people think as well that this takes a lot of time, and I know that gardening is always something to do, and it's always quite heavy on our time, but so a lot of these are one-off jobs. They're small changes, and you can combine them with other things like family activities. So building a bug hotel, or creating a hibernaculum, something you can do with small children, something you can do as a family activity. So it's a great thing to do. And then also based on that, you've got the different insects, the different butterflies that will come to your garden that you can watch alongside your your children or other family members, or just sit there in your garden and enjoy the wildlife, and get those mental health benefits from being connected with nature. You also don't need loads of space to have a wildlife friendly garden. You can have a bucket pond, as long as you follow a bit of that advice that I've given you in terms of having some oxygenating plants in there, making sure wildlife can get in and out. So either sink it in the ground or build up around it, and have little, maybe a log going in there so things can get out. Companion planting. I have absolutely filled my garden with vegetable plants. You don't need 5 courgette plants. Bit of advice there from me, but it's full of stuff. Yet I still have loads of room for all these companion plants. I'm looking at it now. I've got absolutely millions of nasturtiums around. It hasn't affected how my plants are grown in any way, shape, or form. I've also got hangers there as well for where I've got a bit of hard standing, and some plant pots as well. So you don't need loads of space. My terrace garden is absolutely adequate to have all sorts of wildlife in there. And you don't need to have a messy garden. I actually think that quite a wild area looks really nice. These different wildflowers look really beautiful and add a lot of interest. But again, if you like a really tidy garden, you can have either an allocated corner, or you can use pots and planters and just bring that colour and wildlife benefits to your garden in a really neat way. Just to summarise, we focused on toads because they are experiencing those significant population declines. They are in trouble, but it's not too late if we look at doing these different changes in our gardens, and also looking at how we can engage with the government to make, you know, wider changes that benefits, you know, wildlife in the UK as a whole. We can help reverse those declines, but, you know, until that happens, there are lots of different things that we can do. And we are here to support you both through Froglife and through the Wildlife Trust. We have, you know, websites with a range of different resources on there, and I, you know, really recommend that you, you know, use those or get in touch with us if you have any questions. I'll share my contact details with Rebecca to pass on to you. So if you do have a question, or you want to, for example, share some pictures of your pond to see how you can make it better for wildlife, please do that, and I will respond as best as I can and try and help you with that. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and then welcome any questions. How do I stop my share? There we go. There we are. I don't know if Rebecca wants to pick up on that and unmute people.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was so interesting. So many
Thanks.
good and easy ideas there for everyone's garden. Does anyone have any questions?
Trying to see. I don't see anybody. Let's see if there's anything in the chat.
Hi. Yeah, I've got a question.
Hi. Hello.
Hello.
Oh, hi.
Yes,
Yes, I can hear you now. Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you just froze a bit.
Yeah, great.
Oh, yes.
A very small pond.
Yes.
In it was within a polytunnel.
Okay.
So it's at one end of the polytunnel, and I find a lot of newts. I think they're newts anyway. Very, very little lizards around it.
Yeah.
And I keep the door shut of the polytunnel because I'm concerned the neighbour cats will get in there and eat all the wildlife. There's a couple of frogs in there and things, but they get out from underneath the deal off the polytunnel. You can get in or out, or if I should be kind of leaving it open. I don't really know what to do with that. It seems like it's doing lots of,
yeah,
because there's newts around.
I would definitely leave. I wouldn't. I mean, if you are worried about cats and things like that, and I know, you know, with the polytunnel, obviously we need to be thinking about regulating the temperature, etc. I would just make sure that things can get in and out. Remember, they're very small. You know, if your polytunnel doesn't quite reach the ground, that should be ample for them to be able to get in and out, or just have some holes in there that shouldn't affect the general sort of what's the word? They don't need like a massive big door, you know. We're thinking about like that much basically, or even that,
Yeah,
you know, at the bottom.
It goes right down into the ground.
Yeah,
it does go right down into the ground, but then there is bits where I've seen squeeze under. So I kind of, I wasn't sure what the.
I would make sure you can get out, because so I would you could maybe cut a little hole in. I would maybe try and just lift it up a little bit. You don't need loads, maybe near the pond, just in case things need, because again, things like frogs and toads, you know, they do move around. They don't want to be in a pond all year round, and it may be that, especially when it comes to winter, they'll need to find, you know, they maybe need to go to a bit of woodland, or they maybe need to, you know, find some a log pile or something like that to shelter from frost. So it, you know, you may be you know, doing them more harm than good by keeping your polytunnel, so and you allow them to get in. Don't need a massive door. And well done for keeping them away.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah. Okay. Great. Lovely. Thank you.
Right. Great. There's a question on the chat that I'm just going to look at. Okay. Safety is sometimes a concern with ponds, especially if people have small children. Do you have any advice about how to make sure the pond is safe but also wildlife friendly? This is really important. I will say that the danger of ponds is often really sort of over and over exaggerated. You know, injuries and deaths by ponds is really quite rare, but it gets sensational. Or, you know, watching your children, they're really not that dangerous. However, I think it is that if it is an area where children are going to be unsupervised, you make sure there is either a border, so you can look at things like having a little fence around it. I've actually, for my neighbours, I have made a little willow fence. So willow weaving is something that's really easy. Again, I'll try and remember to share some resources on this. The willow fence will be penetrable by wildlife because you don't have to do it really tight. You can leave a little gap at the bottom and it will stop sort of like toddlers get. Or you can think about something like a grate on top if you really need to. So things like making sure that the grill is quite big. So welding grate or construction grate from you know, building sites and things like that. That is something that you can put over your pond. So it this big, you're not going to be stopping toads and frogs from getting out there, especially if that will, you know, it's not going to be pleasant to fall on if you know, going to be better than going into the water. So that's something you can with the pond without it being detrimental to wildlife. But yeah, something like a border will hopefully help. Okay, another question. My garden pond always has frogs and frog spawn every spring, and I'd like to watch the tadpoles develop. However, there haven't been any frogs for 2 years. Any thoughts on why? It may be that they have moved on to somewhere else, or it may be that your pond develop as you know, as over builds up, the vegetation grows up, they get more dense. It may be that that pond is no longer ideal for frogs. If you'd like to send me a picture of it, I'm actually going to put my that's my email address, and I'll also make sure it's forwarded to you as well. If you'd like to send me some pictures of the pond, then I can have a look and see if there's any advice I can give you. But sometimes, you know, they just find a different pond for a couple of years, and then maybe the next generation will come to your pond. So I would, number one, have a look and see if there is any changes you can make. If there's anything that's slightly detrimental, you know, that's maybe made it less favourable, and then number two, maybe just wait a little bit and see if something comes back, or think about making your garden a little bit more suitable for frogs. So then maybe in the winter they'll be encouraged into your garden, and then they'll find your pond again in the spring. But you know, wildlife, it does fluctuate, and you know, you do get things one year. There are good years for animals, there are bad years for animals. The same with growing vegetables. I've had no beans this year. I don't know why. But last year I had loads of beans. So I wouldn't worry. But yes, if you'd like to send me a picture of your pond, or just, you know, go through that checklist of the different things when I send you that resource, that may be something that can give you a bit of a clue. Okay, any other questions at all? No, I think so. Great. If you do have any questions, you can email them to me, or you can get in touch with Rebecca. I'm not entirely sure how Nature Natter works, but I'm sure there's a way to get in touch. Yes. So is that okay, Rebecca? Anything else that you need from me?
That's absolutely fine. That's great.
I've had one more question.
Go on.
One more question. Are there any plants which are really good for frogs? I would say anything that provides really good border coverage for your pond. Things like water lilies as well. Again, I'll send you that resource that has got all the different plants on there. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sara. That was really, really great and really interesting. Loads of great tips. But yeah, I've recorded this presentation, so if Sara doesn't mind, I can send that out to you all afterwards if you want to go over and kind of recap or re-watch any bits. And Sarah's obviously given you her email address, which is really kind, and I've put my email address down there as well if you've got any questions or anything either. You can contact either of us, but I hope you've all enjoyed the session. And yeah, thank you so much, Sarah, for coming and doing that presentation.
I've enjoyed it. So yes,
perfect.
Yeah, and please, if anybody does make any changes or builds upon anything, particularly as a result of this session, please send some photos, because it's really important that, especially projects like this, all sorts of nature projects, particularly things like the Wildlife Trust, really depends on things like external funding from things like Heritage Lottery Fund, and they really rely on feedback and to see that the things that we're doing are making a difference. So by helping us, and I'm also going to share an evaluation thing with you as well, which I share through Rebecca, if you could fill that in for Froglife. So again, we can get back to our donors. The more feedback we give and the more positive things that we can show that we've made, positive changes that we've made, the more likely that they are to support ongoing nature conservation, the more likely it is that, you know, it's supported in things like government, and you know, we continue to try and reverse some of these widespread nature declines that we're experiencing throughout the world. Well, let's just focus on the UK. Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a lovely rest of the day, and hopefully see you soon.
Brilliant. Bye, everybody.
Thank
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.